Life Stories.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, David. What a story. Excellent. When's the movie coming out? Well, I mean, your story, is it your story synonymous with many, many young people in Glasgow?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I'm one of the ones who's been blessed, who, for some reason, God has intervened in my life. A lot of friends and a lot of people that I've grown up with who've had similar stories are no longer here. My brother being one of them.
And you mentioned, was there only you and your brother in the family?
Yeah, I've got two brothers, but it was my big brother who passed away.
Right.
I'm the youngest.
And what about your other brother? Are you in contact with him now?
Yeah, I'm in contact with him. He's on a journey with God.
Hallelujah.
He's doesn't believe, but I think he's. I don't know.
We'll keep praying for him anyway. Now,
Sure.
you mentioned your dad. That was brought some structure into your life. And what about your mom? Was your mom around at all?
Yeah, my mum's around. My mum's still around. She's been there from day one. My number one fan. She's still here. I actually work with my mum in the business, and she's just about to retire. So yeah, she's came to Christ over the years. As part of the same church as I am. So yeah.
Excellent. So you're doing it's going out like ripples in your life, touching people.
Yeah. The people that want to receive God will, and the people that won't. But I'll continue to share and let people know there's an opportunity there for them.
Excellent. Now, you said when you were about 11, between primary school and high school, you were a bit of a bad boy, and you like to having fun, you called it. But did you realise at that time that you were actually breaking the law?
Yeah.
As simple as that. Okay. So anyway, you grew up and you went to high school, okay, and having realised, you said you started drinking and hanging around with gangs. How did that happen? Did that just happen automatically, or was it people you're hanging about with, or what?
Yeah, it just pretty much happened naturally. Like, we were hanging about in the area where I grew up, and you have a group of friends. You're 10, you're 11, and you're just having fun, doing what you're doing. And then when you're propelled into high school, things change when you go to high school. And with the gang culture in Glasgow is that there's older boys who are in your gang, and there's older boys who are in other gangs, and basically you inherit their beef. They used to fight, they have enemies, and you're from this area, so now they people are your enemies, and it naturally just happens. And as we hung around in a large group of boys, we naturally just became that gang from that area. So we basically just fell in line essentially and got involved in the stuff that we seen. And as young men who didn't have a lot of direction, or a lot of us didn't have male role models, the older people that we hung around with were our role models. We looked to them, and that's how it just happened. And I'd imagine that would be the same for the boys in the other gangs from the different areas. We were just told that essentially that's your enemy and you fight them, and that's what we done. And then you begin to hurt people, and people begin to hurt you, and so it solidifies that mindset that these people are your enemy because they have now done stuff personally to you, and vice versa. And now it's, when you see these people, it's an automatic fight, no matter where you are. In the middle of the street, broad daylight, whether the police are there, whether the cameras are looking, whether there's witnesses, kids, whatever, it just becomes a running battle on the streets, and that was what happened quite a lot. And
were you ever scared in those situations?
Yeah. That's what I said earlier. Like, the alcohol helps, when you're a young kid and you're running towards other guys and you're throwing bottles and they're throwing bricks, and sometimes people had knives and stuff like that. It's scary. And to be honest, you don't really want to be there. You don't really want to be doing that. but you're part of this group of people that are doing it. That's what's expected of you, and it's essentially peer pressure, but it gives you an adrenaline rush. And as I got older, and maybe a bit more braver or maybe a bit more drunker, I thought I enjoyed it. And then I ended up like bitter and angry and hating these people, and that just takes over, it takes over the fear. But yes, to answer your question, I was scared, anxious, worried for my safety, but you still just do it.
Now, okay. And do you think, is that still prevalent in Glasgow today, the gang culture? Is it still going on today?
I think it's still going on, but I don't think it's as prevalent. I think it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, every single area had multiple gangs.
Wow.
I think nowadays it's still there in some areas, but not as much. So the area where I grew up, Rutherglen, is one small section of Glasgow, and we had 9 different gangs, probably in about a 5-mile radius. So we would be going to school, and we would go through areas that we had problems with. So sometimes people would be waiting at bus stops, and you would have to run into school, and then they would come to your school, and you would go to their school and try and catch people, and they'd come and try and catch you. And I remember people having to get taxis home and stuff because school buses were getting ambushed. So folk were then getting taxis home because they were fearing for their safety.
And did you ever feel having, say, had a fight or an altercation with one of these gangs, did you ever have any regrets after any of these fights?
Probably not at the time, no. No, because you're essentially, you have this mindset that these people are your enemy. It was the same with the police. I was very violent towards the police, and I never regretted it at the time because I seen the police as my enemy. I seen the police as these people who were falsifying charges against me, lying in court, just to get me off the street. And it was the same way with other gangs. We seen them as our enemy. We had no regrets. Our mission was to hurt them as much as possible, and that was it, really.
Okay. Now, you were quite a figure. 6'5" is quite tall to be coming at you at any stage. So I wouldn't be scared if you came at me. But you also said that you were no angel, and the police actually targeted you. In what way did the police target you, do you feel?
Well, because I was such a nuisance in the area, and as a gang we were causing a lot of problems, falsifying charges. They would I remember the police telling me that they would lock me up to prevent crime. So they would lie. I would be walking down the street and I'd be arrested for a fake crime that never happened, and I'd be sent to prison for 6 months. So you can imagine how that made me feel towards authority, towards police. And then when I got to about 18, 19, I decided that if the police are going to arrest me and send me to prison for no reason, then my mindset at that point was I'm going to give them a reason. So they would arrest me for whatever, and then that arrest would turn into multiple charges because I would be punching, biting, spitting, headbutting, kicking. So a lot of my previous convictions are police assaults, because the police were just a gang who could do what they want. They could beat you up, but if you hit them back, you're getting charged with a crime. So it's double standards, or it was double standards. I don't know what it's like now, but when I was growing up and I was being arrested, I was exposed to violence from the police, and I would answer that with violence. But I'd go through the court system and go to prison, and they'd go home to their families.
And how is your relationship with the police now?
Yeah, it's better. I don't have a problem with the police. I just see the police as human beings. They need Jesus. They're sinners like me, like everybody else. I've had the opportunity to witness the police.
Hallelujah.
We had a couple of police in our church at one point. I have friends that are police. It's the same with prison officers. Getting into prison to work with people, I encounter prison officers. I need to work with these types of people side by side now because I have a different mindset and a different goal. My goal is to reach people for Jesus. So if I'm going to get hung up on somebody's occupation, then that's going to be a stumbling block for me being able to share the gospel. So I just see them as people, and if I'm really honest, there's probably still some ill feeling towards police at times when I think back at the things that's happened to me or like that. But I choose to overlook that for the sake of God's kingdom and for the sake of the gospel.
Now, you also said you've been to the court many times, and I think you said you were in prison over 20 times. How did you feel as a young lad the first time you were put in prison?
Yeah, it was pretty grim, pretty scary. Just the unknown, just being put in the vans with the black windows, and there was a lot of banging and shouting and yelling, and it sounded like these people this was normal. It was like caged animals. This was normal. But for me, this was my first time, so it was very intimidating. Then walking along the big corridor with an orange jumpsuit on that wouldn't have fitted a guy who was 5 foot, never mind a guy who was 6'4". Going into these big old Victorian halls, music blaring, and then basically just you're put in, a door opens, you go into a cell, the door closes, you don't know the person, you're sharing a cell, there's no toilet, there's a pot in the corner to urinate in and defecate in. A serious shock to the system. That was not long after my 16th birthday was the first time when I was sent to prison. So that was a serious shock to the system because since my dad died, I was running around and there was lawlessness and I was doing what I wanted. And then all of a sudden I'm locked in a box. I'm going from one box to a box with wheels to another box to another box. And that was it. My life was under the control of the Scottish Prison Service for long time. I think I spent about between 5.5 and 6 years in prison in total. I never done really big sentences, but I would do like a 12-month sentence and then I'd be out for a week and then I'd get like another 10 months and then I'd be out for 2 weeks and then I'd get another 12 months. So the sentences were years at a time, like 10 years, 5 years, but they were back to back. So that's how I became pretty much institutionalized.
And while in prison, was there any effort for reformation or to try and change how you behaved? Was there any classes or anything you could have gone to, or any counselling or anything like that in prison?
There was the fellowship, but the thing with the thing in prisons, because the resources, the short-term prisoners don't really get much options. It's more for long-term prisoners because they need to be seen to be progressing, so that before they go in front of the parole board, they need to have done so many courses to be released. So the short-term prisoners don't really get courses. They just go through and they work and then they're released. Nothing changes. You're more angry towards the system. You're more bitter. You've learned more about crime. You've learned how to sell drugs, make money, and then you're kicked back out into the streets, homeless sometimes, with no money, and then that's it. It just starts again. I remember being released from prison as a young man, and the train station had an off sales right next to it. So everybody was released for the prison, walk down to the off sales, walk into the train station, get the train back to Glasgow, and by the time you're back at Glasgow, 9:30, 10 in the morning, and you're extremely intoxicated. So yeah, it's not a good start.
You said you had no purpose in life, but God kept putting Christians in your path. Where was the first encounter you had with Christians in your path?
The first physical Christians was about 2011. For me, it was books. There was books in my cells. There was Bibles. There was a book called How to Catch a Thief. I think it was a guy, Richard Taylor. I think he was maybe Welsh or English. That was in my cell. And then there was the guys from Tough Talk. Their book was in my cell. And then when I was in a young offenders, they actually came in and spoke. So I think the first time was 2009, and then the chaplain in 2011. And then that was when I had decided to go to the fellowship when I was in Berlin prison in Glasgow. And then I was transferred to Kilmarnock prison. And that's when I really got involved in the fellowship.
Stories.
You also said there when you were telling our story that at 21 you came to know Jesus, but it took about 3 years before you really committed yourself. Was there a particular defining moment in your life when you committed your life? Because some people can remember the time, the date that they accepted Jesus. What about you?
Yeah, for me, I think it was more of a period, and it was more of a transition. Like, I think I'd committed my life to Jesus multiple times by praying and asking for help, but not really understanding how to walk the walk. But for me, it was that defining moment was probably in 2014 when I was doing my last prison sentence, and when I had cried out to God again and basically said, this time I'm going to fully commit, and I did. And with the help of the leadership from the local church and being discipled by them, being taught, being trained, making the decision to go to Bible school, that I think that time in 2014 was the pivotal point, the defining moment where I was now on these tracks, and I was on these tracks properly moving towards God. But from 2011 to 2014, I'd been saying prayers, asking God for help. People were coming into my life, but I wasn't fully ready, I don't think, at that point. I think I had to come to a place of complete and utter brokenness, and a place of complete and utter this isn't working, something needs to change. And I think when temptation comes in, you very easily get deceived and think, oh, sell drugs, get lots of money, get a car, get your driving license, that's the answer. But then you do that for a wee while and realise this is no different. And Satan tries to sell you fake answers, and sometimes you get distracted by them and you go off on a tangent for a wee while, and God's still there just drawing you in and trying to get you to come back to him, and kind of like prodigal son material. Like, I knew God was there, I knew he loved me, I'd encountered his grace and I'd encountered the gospel, but the temptation of the world and money and women and girls and whatever else kept pulling me back.
I like what you said, girls there, pulling you back. What advice or encouragement could you give to anybody who might be listening to this later on or tonight, who are going through a similar type of experience you went through, like it took a period of time to really commit? What advice could you give to them today?
I think for me, when things began to change was when I committed to the local church, became a member of a local church and got planted in a local church, because through that comes accountability, comes fellowship, comes oversight, comes new friendships, new experiences. So being planted in a local church, commit fully to a local church, serve in areas, give your time to the local church. When I was no longer at a prison, I was involved with food banks and stuff like that. In that time in 2014, I just tried to film my time with being around the church. So being at food banks, being at fellowship groups, being at rehab groups, whatever, just to really be in that environment, because we're renewed when our minds are transformed. So we need to put new stuff into our minds. We need to have new experiences. We need to have new friendships, new people speaking into our lives. And I think for me, the local church and the people who spent time with me made a whole lot of difference, because I was no longer just coming and going, just coming whenever I felt like it. There was people who were allocated to me, essentially a pastor, who was encouraging me to come to church twice on a Sunday, come in the morning and help us set up and serve, and then come at night and relax and listen to the word and stuff. So there was people there who were prompting me. But if you don't have that accountability and that relationship with the local church, you may just drift in and drift out.
Excellent. So, yeah. You said there was a time, one particular time, of course, when you couldn't contact your brother, and there was a bit of a knockback for you, and you went back to selling drugs. How did the Christians react when that happened to you?
Well, my brother actually died, so it was more than a knockback. I found his corpse basically, but the Christians were great. Like, the Christians were very gracious, very understanding. I can't fault the Christians, the folk in my church who, I was getting into fights and then coming in to Bible school the next morning with a sore hand and still half drunk, so these people just loved me, accepted me, and were in the trenches with me, just believing and praying for me that this season would pass, you know.
Amen. Well, of
Yeah.
course, we're sorry to hear about your brother, of course.
Yeah.
But now you moved on a bit, of course, and you said you went to the local church, and at one stage you were actually running the church for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, trying to.
right. How did that feel to you, being in charge?
Yeah, for me, I don't feel that I am called to be a pastor. I don't feel that that's the gift that God has given me. But for a season, I was in that role or to do that, and for me, it was growth, but it was frustrating. I had desires to reach people, and I was tied up with the current people that we had in our church. So for me, it was growth, it was learning, but it's not where I feel or know that God wants me, and it's not where my accountability guys or the leadership team in my church know and feel where I should be. It was, I was just willing to serve. The guy who was pastor in the church was moving on to take on more responsibility somewhere else. So I was given the opportunity, and it was in the area where I grew up, and I had a desire to have a church there and reach these people. So I was willing to step in and give it a go. And I did so for over a year, and then ultimately was released into other things. So yeah, I gave it a go.
And what did you learn from that experience?
Oh, a lot.
If anything.
To be honest, I think I learned more about myself because at the same time I was doing a counselling course, and I learned that actually when other people are bothering you or annoying you, it's not actually them, it's in you. The stuff's in you, and you can go on a journey of discovery and figure that out and get healing for that. But I learned also that I'm not a pastor, and I learned that that's not a role where I want to be in life. It gave me clarity on what I am and what God wants to use me for. I believe that the people around about me would have grown through my input, but it was a season of learning and clarity, I would think, and growth for myself. I think God just threw me into the furnace so He could sanctify me a wee bit quicker.
Amen. And what is your vision and goal now these days?
My vision goal, to work with prisoners, to work in prisons and to preach the gospel.
Excellent. And you said you go back into prison. How does it actually feel for you now going into of your own free will walking into prison? How does that feel?
It feels quite strange, because when I walk into a prison, I feel like a prisoner, and when I sit with a group of guys who are prisoners, I feel like I'm one of them, because that's just how it has been for so long. So I need to remind myself that I'm visiting and I'm going home, and I'm here for a purpose. If I'm invited into a prison, I know that God has opened that door for a reason, so that I can go in there and testify about Him and ultimately share the gospel with these people. So at the moment, I've been in 5 or 6 different prisons in Scotland. So
Excellent.
pretty good.
Excellent. Now, of course, more and more importantly, of course, you've got yourself a lovely new wife and 2 kids. Tell us a little bit about the family.
Yeah. I met my wife through. She came to the church, was part of the fellowship that I was in. We just started dating, clicked. I was single at the time. I had been on a journey with different relationships, and then just not living right, and had a period of celibacy essentially and singleness, and then God brought my wife into my path, and we dated for some time, and then we got married in 2016, I want to say.
Don't forget that.
And then we had our first daughter a couple of years ago, and then we have had another daughter in the last 4 months. So life is very different, having kids, going from independence, single, to married, to having kids, to having a business, to be involved in a church, having responsibility. So God has really been changing me a lot over the years, and I've been just essentially transforming me, but from one degree to the next.
And tell us, what are your girls' names then? Tell us.
Sophie and Summer.
And how old are they? How old are they?
And my wife's name's Stephanie. It's all S's.
Okay.
One's 4 months and one's 2 years.
Oh, so you've got your handfuls of nighted then as well, feeding babies, changing nappies.
Yeah.
And
That's where we're at.
how does that make you feel then?
It's great. It's a great experience. I love it. I love being a dad. It's obviously new to me, so it's just figuring it out as you go. But as if you've had kids, you'll understand that it can be frustrating. It can be challenging.
Yes, I have 2 girls myself. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it has its challenges, but the good outweighs the bad.
Amen. Now you did also mention you started the business in your hometown, shall we say? Tell us a bit about the business.
So the business, basically, when I came out of prison and I stopped selling drugs, I was looking for employment and wasn't really able to get employment. So I ended up being a delivery driver for a local takeaway place, saved up some money. I had some money tucked away as well, and I basically turned it into a business. I opened a food place, me and my mum, selling breakfast and lunches and stuff like that, and I've had that for 6 years. So that was right in the heart of the area where I grew up. So that kind of went well with getting to know the community, and the other side of the community, maybe people that I never knew, and trying to reach people and, advertising the church and outreach meetings and stuff that we were having, getting to know people, chatting with people. And yeah, it's pretty good business. It's been ticking over for 6 years, but at the moment I'm trying to move into a different season, and I'm looking at selling that and being released for that so that I can focus on other stuff.
And you said, so it's in your own hometown, people will know you. They'll know you've been a bad boy and you've been in court and in prison. But now that your life has changed, has that brought any reaction from the local community?
Yeah, I think I was still pretty much involved in that area. Obviously, with the church, we were out in the streets weekly. We were doing a lot of outreach meetings. I have a business there, so yeah, it's not like I've changed and then moved on. I've changed, and people have seen the change. God has kept me there, and people can argue with you about the gospel not being true and about Jesus not dying for you on a cross, but they can't argue if they've known you for 30 years and they've seen the real change in your life. You went from this and you're this. It's alien to them. They don't understand it. I don't know if some people can grasp it or they can't, but most people are happy. Some people say, I'm pleased that it keeps you out of prison. Some people see Jesus as an antidote for not going to prison. But that is what it is, aye.
And have you had the opportunity to reach out to any of your own members of your old crew or gang?
Yeah. I've shared the gospel with every single one of them. Some have responded, some haven't. Some just avoid me now because I'm just that Christian guy who talks about Jesus.
Well, it's been fantastic speaking to you, David. Thank you so much for your fantastic story, and all the best with your business in the future, of course. But there's one last question I have, which I ask all the guests on here, and that is, of all the decisions you made in your life, what is the best decision you ever made?
Well, I think becoming without being textbook Christian, like becoming a Christian is the most important decision in this life and for the next, because it's not only, you could look at my life and be like, well, that's great, he's married, he's got kids, he's got a business, that's great, he's doing well in life, but ultimately this life is coming to an end at some point. It's guaranteed, and eternity awaits every single person. It's hell or heaven, there's no in between. We need to make a decision, and I've made that decision to receive Jesus, make him my Lord and my Saviour, receive the forgiveness that he offers, and ultimately in the next life I know and believe that I'll spend eternity with him. And that's extremely important, because eternity is forever. This life is, the Bible refers to it as a vapor, like grass. One day it's here, the next day it's gone. And 60, 70, 80 years in comparison to eternity, man, it's a no-brainer. So I'm very, very, very thankful to God that he opened my eyes. He let me see the gospel. He let me see the truth. And he brought me to a place where my heart was ready to receive him. So that is the most important decision I've made, and any human being on this earth can make, is to become a Christian, to accept that we've fallen short. We don't meet God's standards, but God has his hand out, reaching to us through his grace, his love and his mercy, and he's offering us the free gift of forgiveness and salvation. So that is it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, David. Fantastic talking to you, David. As we said, we wish you all the best in the future with your business.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I'm just going to hand back to my brother Alan.
Thank you, David, so much for all your sharing your story and answering George's questions so succinctly. It's been lovely hearing you tonight and hearing how God has changed you. We do pray God will bless you and your family, and that he will use you in the coming days to reach many, many more people, those in prison and those you've known from the past. We pray that God will really use you. You'll have a fruitful life for the Lord. Bless you, David, so much.
Amen.
Thank you, George. And tonight, thank you for joining us for Life Stories Worldwide. Let me ask you again, if you need any help, need any prayer, please contact us on the number you see on your screen. +44 794 355 0287 if you're outside the UK. If you're in the UK, you're 0794 355 0287. You can phone, text, or WhatsApp, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. Also, you heard David say the greatest decision he ever made was to follow God, to give his life to God. And if you want to know more, if you want to know how can I know God, then please go to our website, lifestoriesworldwide.com. You'll find a link there. You can click on How Can I Know God? And you can find out more information about that. Let me please give you also an invitation to join us next week, next Monday at 8 o'clock, when we have a speaker called Peter Cunningham. Peter was born and grew up in London, and he got involved also in his teenage years in riotous living. But then 21, his life changed. Got involved in the share market, but then he also became a pastor, pastored several churches. But then he got called into a work helping homeless people. And he set up a work called Green Pastures. And up to date, they have housed 1,225 people. That is the work. He's got a wonderful story to share next week. So please join us next week at 8 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, David. Thank you, George. Thank you, Howard. God bless you all. May you have a wonderful week. May God bless you. May you know the peace and the love of God. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Life Stories.